On a freezing December night in 1960, Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the most powerful men in Russia, was pacing back and forth through the dim stone corridors of the Moika Palace. In a few minutes, one of the most controversial assassinations in history would begin. The target was a peasant, but not an ordinary peasant. Empress's favorite, a mystic believed to have saved the future heir, a hated shadow advisor, a man about whom novels, songs, and legends were fabricated. Grigori Rasputin. No one knows exactly what happened that night. Prince Yusupov's accounts are contradictory. Police reports are incomplete. Witness statements do not match. But one thing is certain, Rasputin's death would become a symbol of Russia's collapse. So, how did a peasant shake an empire this much? Who was Rasputin really? Was he a healer? A fraud? A cult member? Or one of history's most successful political manipulators? In this story, where legend and reality are intertwined, we will examine Rasputin's rise, his influence over the palace, and the conspiracy that ultimately erased him from the stage of history. During his lifetime, Rasputin was an extraordinary figure who became the target of both immense hatred and almost religious admiration. What set him apart from other mystics was not the claim of special powers, but where his influence reached. The fact that a peasant could enter the heart of one of the world's greatest empires, the Romanov Palace, was already a major anomaly. Moreover, even while he was alive, there was a constantly growing cloud of legends surrounding Rasputin. Claims that he stopped Alexei's bleeding, rumors that he guided the Tsarina during the war, stories that poison, bullets, and even drowning were not enough to kill him. These portrayed Rasputin as an immortal demon. Which of these were real and which were propaganda? Even this question itself is one of the key elements that turn him into a legend. Rasputin was born in 1869 in a small village called Prokhorovskoye in Siberia. He was uneducated, and his literacy was limited, shaped by the simplicity of village life. He was known in his youth both for his deep religious searches and his vagabond behavior. There are two theories about the origin of the nickname Rasputin. The first is that it comes from the Russian word Rasputny, meaning debauched, wayward, immoral. The second is Rasputia, meaning crossroad intersection. This is a more mystical interpretation. Both are used, but in Polish records of the time, the meaning debauched is more dominant. In his 20s, Rasputin experienced a deep religious crisis. He became somewhat withdrawn, praying in caves or in the forest, entering states of ecstasy for hours. During this time, rumors spread that he had joined the Kalistic sect. The Kalists were a radical sect that performed night rituals and entered trance by weeping themselves. There is no definitive proof that Rasputin actually became a member. However, the extremity of his forms of worship, his trance-like speeches in influencing people, and especially the spiritual intimacies he formed with women caused these rumors to spread. This period is a fundamental turning point that led him to be known as a healer among the peasantry, while also being documented as a controversial cult figure. In the early 1900s, he left Russia and embarked on a long pilgrimage to Athens, Jerusalem, and Mount Athos. This journey was a turning point in his life. During this process, two claims emerged. Prophetic ability. He began claiming to have insight into people's lives and illnesses. Healing. He started being described as someone who could calm people with his touch, especially regarding mental illnesses and pain, and who could reduce fever when he prayed. From a medical perspective, what is still debated is this: Rasputin's voice, gaze, and way of listening genuinely had a calming effect. Modern psychology explains this as hypnotic suggestion. After returning from this pilgrimage, Rasputin was no longer known as a village mystic, but as a mystical traveler, and this reputation will take him directly to St. Petersburg, the heart of the empire. Rasputin's entry into the palace was not a coincidence. The spiritual sources of the time, palace intrigues, and the deep desperation of Tsarina Alexandra combined to open doors for him almost on their own. Between 1903 and 1905, Rasputin was one of the holy men who carried their mystical reputation from Siberia to St. Petersburg. When he arrived in the capital, he quickly attracted attention among the official church hierarchy and religious mystics, because stories of visions and healing by touch circulated around him. Especially Countess Anastasia and Countess Militsa, two aristocratic women close to the Romanovs and interested in spiritualism, saw Rasputin as a man of God and recommended him to Tsarina. Since these women knew about Alexandra's son's illness, they opened the door by saying this man can heal the child. Rasputin was first summoned to the palace in 1905. The Tsarina wrote that by looking into his eyes, she believed he was a man of God. Rasputin spoke in an extremely calm, confident, and non-judgmental manner. He softened Alexandra's tense state of mind. During this period, Rasputin was tested by aristocracy, especially Bishop Theophan, the Tsarian's spiritual advisor. Bishop Hermogen and other prominent clergy of the city tried to determine whether he was pure, dangerous, genuine, or a fraud. While some were impressed, others approached him with suspicion, calling him a peasant performing mystical tricks. His meeting with Tsar Nicholas II in 1906 also falls into this period. This meeting was short, formal, and distant. However, the note Nicholas wrote in his diary is important. He seems like a simple man devoted to God. In other words, the Tsar's first impression was positive. Around 1907, Alexei suffered an internal bleeding episode. Doctors said the child might die. Desperate, the Tsarina called Rasputin. Rasputin prayed, calmed Alexei, and the aspirin given by the doctors was withdrawn. Aspirin thins the blood and was worsening the condition. Within a few hours, Alexei showed signs of recovery. The palace saw this event as a miracle. For the Tsarina, from that moment on, Rasputin was not just a mystic, but a holy man who saved her son from death. After this event, Rasputin was no longer someone knocking on the palace door from outside, but a healer and spiritual advisor invited from within. And in Alexandra's mind, the equation was now this: Rasputin, Alexei's survival. No aristocrat, no minister, not even Tsar Nicholas II could break this bond. Without creating any mystery, let's simply define what actually happened. The doctors of the time were giving Alexei aspirin for pain. Aspirin thins the blood. For a hemophilia patient, this is a major danger. Rasputin did not like the palace doctors and was against the medication. When the doctors withdrew, the aspirin was stopped, and consequently the bleeding decreased. The result was not Rasputin's healing him, but the discontinuation of aspirin. Rasputin had a very soft voice and a peculiar way of suggestion. He calmed the child, stopped his crying, and lowered his heart rate. A calmer child meant less movement, which prevented the internal bleeding from worsening. Even the famous and mysterious healing by letter story can be explained very simply in this context. For those who don't know, once when Rasputin was in Siberia, he wrote a letter to the Tsarina and the part concerning Alexei. He wrote, God is easing the child's pain. Remove the doctors. It was recorded that as soon as the letter arrived, the doctors were dismissed and Alexei's crisis passed. The explanation is most likely, again, the stopping of aspirin. Rasputin had not only found a cure for the young boy, but also for Tsarina Alexandra. When Rasputin appeared, two critical things were missing in Alexandra's world. She had completely lost trust in doctors and she felt spiritually inadequate, believing that God was punishing her. Rasputin filled these two voids in a single move. He preached patience, faith, surrender, and healing. After healing the child, he became a savior sent by God for Alexandra. His low voice, slow speech, and hypnotic gaze calmed her. As a result, for the Tsarina, Rasputin was no longer just a healer. He was the only person holding the family together. This led to Rasputin being granted unbelievable privileges in the palace. Although Nicholas initially distanced Rasputin at times, he recalled him every time. Nicholas was a rather passive ruler who avoided conflict and was emotionally fragile. When caught between family and state, he always chose family, not wanting to upset his wife. He avoided interfering too much with Rasputin. Palace doctors, aristocrats, and the church complained about Rasputin. For this reason, Nicholas removed him at certain times. But when Alexandra became stressed without Rasputin, Alexei's condition worsened. Eventually, Nicholas reached this conclusion: if Rasputin brings peace, let him stay. Once even the Tsar began to turn a blind eye to Rasputin, matters escalated to the point where Rasputin interfered in the appointment of bishops and the dismissal and appointment of officials in administration. This process, known as the Ministerial Leapfrog, developed somewhat naturally and became the main reason the aristocracy hatred toward Rasputin intensified. Many high-ranking officials in Russia could not reach the Tsarina directly. They communicated through Rasputin, because the Tsarina believed that Rasputin could sense the will of God. For this reason, a rumor spread within the state. To make a decision in the palace, one must first to go Grigori. He also had influence over the church. As his relationship with Bishop Theophan and other religious leaders grew, Rasputin began expressing opinions on who should become a bishop. For example, if a bishop opposed Rasputin, rumors would begin to remove him from office. If there was another candidate he favored, he would suggest to the Tsarina, "This man is pure-hearted." After 1914, the empire was in a severe crisis. During this period, Rasputin's name was heard behind every major decision. If a minister disliked Rasputin, he would fall out to a favor with the Tsarina. If a minister flattered Rasputin, he would be promoted. As mentioned earlier, this process was mockingly called the Ministerial Leapfrog because ministers changed rapidly, positions constantly shifted, and the government swayed as if dancing. Rasputin did not manage these changes alone, but the perception was overwhelming. The public now thought Rasputin is ruling Russia. During World War I, Tsar Nicholas II made a decision that almost everyone opposed. He would personally take command of the army. This decision was a fatal mistake, and the Tsar's absence, the governance of the state was left to Tsarina Alexandra and the person she trusted most, Rasputin. For the aristocracy, bureaucracy, and the public, this meant that the empire was effectively being run by an experienced woman and a peasant mystic. The war was going badly. Hunger, poverty, and unemployment were growing, and the anger toward the empire was increasing. Under this pressure, the Tsarina became even more attached to Rasputin. His suggestions were no longer just personal, they were turning into decisions about state governance. For example, the dismissal of some generals, replacing them with the more moderate figures, intelligence reports being ignored, political warnings being seen as disloyalty. The press portrayed Rasputin as a German agent because the Empress was a German origin. During the worst period of the war, Rasputin walking quietly inside the palace created the following perception among the people. Russia is not being guided by God, but by Rasputin, and this is leading us to destruction. This perception became one of the strongest social anger dynamics that paved the way for the February Revolution. Witnesses who praised him said, "He spoke softly, was humble, and devoted to God. He had incredible empathy for ordinary people. When he touched Alexei, the child calmed down. There was a power in that," they argued. Most of these positive witnesses were people close to the palace. Witnesses who demonized him said, "His eyes were piercing and disturbing. He performed strange rituals with women. He became aggressive when he drank. He claimed to have relations with dark forces." These were generally princes, diplomats, palace guards, meaning the people who hated Rasputin were concentrated among the elite class. The fact that those who thought positively of him and those who condemned him held such contradicting views also stemmed from Rasputin himself. Because Rasputin had two different atmospheres, calm and serene when alone in a small room with the patient, wild and uncontrolled when drinking at a crowded table. There was no middle ground between love and hatred. Those who loved him and those who hated him exaggerated everything. For this reason, historians cannot fully extract his true personality. In other words, both sides were right, but most of what was told was distorted, including the scandals. The allegations about Rasputin's private life are among the dirtiest and most controversial matters in history. Especially the scandals associated with women and alcohol are intertwined between truth and propaganda. It is certain that Rasputin had very close relations with women. It is known that he took them into his room under the pretext of spiritual purification. Some women saw him as a holy man, while others claimed he was improper. There were witnesses who said he partied with prostitutes, held gatherings in houses, and walked around with women in the streets. Some of these stories may be true, but most of it is a mixture of gossip and political propaganda. Because aristocrats, through smear campaigns in newspapers, began spreading claims that he was conducting perverted cult rituals. Even if it comes from one person, aren't these claims very similar to modern cult accusations? We also understand from police reports that his alcohol use and alleged anti-terrorist activities were exaggerated. The police had Rasputin under surveillance for years. The reports included statements such as womanizer, excessive drunken behavior, his followers' extreme devotion, improper closeness within the palace. But the same reports also stated this: Rasputin was inconsistent with alcohol. Sometimes he did not drink at all for months. Sometimes he drank until he fell under the table in one night. It's not typical for someone said to be alcoholic and constantly partying to abstain from alcohol for months. Another striking line in the report was, "No activity posing a direct threat to the state was detected." So even though the police saw Rasputin as morally problematic, they did not classify him as a political criminal. When the police reports also failed to produce anything that could stop Rasputin, only one option remained for the conspirators who wanted him gone: kill Rasputin. The group that wanted to keep Rasputin consisted of the most privileged, wealthy, and influential families of Russia. This was not just an assassination, it was an eruption of a class war within the palace. At the head of the conspirators was Prince Felix Yusupov, heir to the richest family in Russia, educator in Europe, a permanent figure in society, the natural leader of aristocratic circles that hated Rasputin. From the palace, there was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's nephew. He believed Rasputin destroyed the palace reputation. Right-wing politician Vladimir Pruskevich represented the Ministerial and conservative section. Ultra-conservative deputies saw Rasputin as the head of the germs rotting the state from within. Some officers and palace staff provided logistical support. They controlled doors, passages, and security. Why did they unite? What was the shared motivation? Many reasons can be cited, but when the period is examined in detail, two main reasons emerge. First, to break the influence of Empress Alexandra because the empress was seen as German and hostility toward her was intense during the war. Eliminating Rasputin meant weakening the empress. Second, the desire of the Russian aristocracy to restore its honor, because the peasant having influence over the palace was a humiliation for the nobles. Rasputin's death is one of the strangest and most debated cases in history. What exactly happened hour by hour that night at the Yusupov Palace? Poison cake, wine, ballots, and drowning attempts. What details are medically possible? Below, we try to recount the events in order based on the official narrative, Yusupov's own writings years later, and forensic facts, because the stories and the autopsy report do not match. 22:30. Rasputin arrives at the palace. Yusupov invites Rasputin on the pretext of introducing him to his wife Irina. Rasputin is taken downstairs. The assassins wait upstairs. 23 o'clock. Poison cake and wine. The conspirators offer Rasputin cyanide-laced cake and wine. But here is the problem. The autopsy found no poison in Rasputin's stomach. So either no poison was used, or the dose was wrong, or Rasputin truly showed extraordinary resistance. Modern historians say the cyanide part is very likely a myth. 12:30. The first shot. When the poison fails, Yusupov panics and shoots Rasputin at close range. A single bullet to the chest. Rasputin falls. Yusupov runs upstairs shouting, "It's done!" 12:50. Rasputin rises. This is the most famous part of the myth. When Yusupov goes back downstairs to check the body, Rasputin suddenly gets up, lunges at him, and tries to escape. This part is likely exaggerated. It would be difficult to move like that with a chest wound, but possible if the bullet missed vital organs. 12:55. Second and third shots in the courtyard. As Rasputin runs, Pruskevich fires. It is claimed one bullet hit his side and another his head. The autopsy confirms a fatal headshot. 1-10. The drowning claim. The conspirators wrapped the body in a carpet and threw it into the Neva River. For years, the story circulated that water was found in his lungs, meaning he drowned while alive. But the autopsy found no water. This proves Rasputin did not die by drowning. 1:30. The bloody scene ends. Rasputin dies. The body is found in the river at dawn. What is true? At least 3 bullets. The headshot was fatal. The poisoning story is very likely a myth. No drowning. What is legendary? The immortality test with poison cake. Suddenly standing up and running may be partially exaggerated. Breathing underwater for a long time. When Rasputin's body was pulled from the water, aside from a small icon around his neck, a rosary inside his coat, a small cross, letters belonging to the empress. Some sources claim they were secret letters, but this had not been officially confirmed. And some money, nothing else was found. Contrary to popular belief, the letter with the phrase, "If I die, the Tsardom will die," was not found on him. It was found on his desk at home. In the letter Rasputin wrote in December 1916, he said, "If I am killed by a common peasant, nothing will threaten the Tsar and his family. But if nobles stain their hands with my blood, the Tsardom will collapse within 6 months." Russia's most aristocratic families, Yusupov, Priskevich, and Grand Duke Dmitry, Rasputin's feared scenario came true exactly. He already told those around him that he was hated and expected to die. Perhaps with this letter he wanted to scare those who wanted to kill him by creating a mystical aura and strengthening the trust of who believed in his political institution. But apparently, he did not have enough time to deliver it to the necessary places and ensure its spread. The interesting thing is that Rasputin's prophecy came true in an almost unbelievable coincidence. Rasputin was killed in December 1916. Tsar Nicholas was dethroned in March 1917. If you want us to tell what happened after Rasputin's death as well, please let us know in the comments. Meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn off the notification bell. Rasputin's story is more than just a man left in the dark corner of history. He is actually a symbol that carried the collapse of an empire in his shadow. To some, he was a charlatan. To others, a born mystic, but there is one thing everyone agrees on. Wherever Rasputin went, he left behind fear, admiration, and curiosity. His death did not save the Romanovs. The war did not end. The crisis did not subside, and the palace continued to decay. Perhaps Rasputin did not start the collapse. He merely made visible the cracks that no one wanted to see. And this is why we still discuss him today. The line between the real Rasputin and the legendary Rasputin still cannot be fully distinguished even after a century. And maybe that's why, since the day he died, Rasputin has actually never truly died. Goodbye.